Hey fellow skeptics, Buster the Skeptic Tank here. Just going to do a quick unboxing. The unboxing should be snappy, like that. But this is another unveiling of physical media. I do have an electronic copy. I've had it longer. I think ever since I found it on Google Books, whatever they want to call it. I know Google's been known to change branding every so often, and I'm kind of tired of that, but that's me. But I figured I got to get this on physical media before it becomes out of print. There have been only a couple, I would believe, my personal collection of books, my personal library, maybe about 2 books I bought out of print, or at least ones I really thought I should have. I know one for sure I got out of print, and yes, if you can find something out of print for, I wouldn't say it's a great price, I wouldn't say it's a good price, but I would say it's not a horrible price. Just understand, if you find that out of print book, you're going to pay a pretty penny. It's a matter of how badly you want it, right? But this, having read the digital copy, I find it interesting if I were to start reading this book. Now, the interesting thing about the whole aura around this man, Bill Walsh, and a little bit of honesty on my part. I grew up in San Diego, where I technically am an immigrant. Technically speaking, I was born in a different country. I naturalized right before my 18th birthday. I believe it was spring 1999. So just 2 months shy, maybe a little less than that. So what ended up happening, I did not have to take a test, and it was my own surprise when the dude just shook my hand and said, "Hey, congratulations. Oh, by the way, you can change your name." So I did drop one aspect of my names, which I have a lengthy one. For those who know me, you know who you are. But growing up as a kid, I didn't grow up with football. Football was a sport, or American football, to be clear. Yes, there's the global football that Americans here, I think America's the only one calling it soccer. I will not throw shade against that sport, but American football is what I knew first compared to that in soccer. But I did grow up playing basketball because my dad played basketball in the Philippines. But I think we had a cable at the time, and we were aware of the Super Bowl. We were aware loosely of the Super Bowl commercials. I think this was around 88 because Boomer Esiason was a player. Now, fast forward mid-90s, early 90s, Cowboys were big. I didn't exactly have an allegiance, but I kind of knew, the big names at the time. But at the same time, in the mid-90s, I was more cognizant of what's going on in the game, especially when I either read some books I checked out on football, units in football, like flag football, learning little things here and there. And, of course, around that time I got involved with the football video games, and I think I've been on a number of streams already participating as a panelist, talking about the history I've had, particularly in the mid-90s, because that's where it kind of, I don't know if it exploded, but there was a boom. Around mid-90s, I started getting more cognizant in the game, more cognizant of play-by-play analysts. So terms were being thrown around, especially when the Niners went to the 94 season, getting to the Super Bowl in 95. And I think when they tried to repeat, there were terms thrown out there, names. So Bill Walsh, West Coast Offense, Mike Holmgren, and these other folks that I would learn later in life as I kind of obsessively dug into the 49ers history. Walsh was instrumental in creating a coaching tree. And of course, people in the early aughts and throughout the 2010s up to 2020 recently, people would know about the Patriot Way. Well, before that, the 49ers have the 49er Way, which when you look at a lot of the stuff from NFL films, and that was another thing I was nerding out on as a teenager. I got into sports and athletics. I was doing weightlifting at 15. So I was really into team sports, but I was a short guy, not really sure if I was going to make it. I think I had a cruddy 40 time. I forget what I clocked myself at, but I likely wouldn't have made it on the high school team anyway. But so soaking all of that in, and I set on this path. I guess that was my golden decade, mid 90s, early 90s, where I was in this weird pursuit of what makes a tradition of excellence. Although I would not call it tradition at the time because I didn't know tradition the way I know tradition to this day. So before I go on off weird tangents, I essentially just try to soak up whatever I can get my hands on without being transported to the 49ers in the late 90s, early 2000s, and try to get myself latched onto the 49er tradition in whatever way I could. Short of walking onto the 49er headquarters and saying, hey, can I be part of this thing? So, my brother would know about it. We grew up, and thanks to things like Madden, we would start drawing our own plays. And I would try to get into the psychology of coaches because there's been a collection of literature I checked out at libraries. Stuff from, I forget what the title was, but it was pretty much 12 coaches being interviewed, whatever. You would get these coaches' insights about how they became successful. So, but being the Niner fan that I became, I started with this, and I think there was another. He's had his own share of books, and I remember the books I checked out at the library, and if there was one out-of-print book, I don't know if it's escaped me ultimately. I wouldn't be surprised if it did, but I remember 1997 or 1998, there was that book, Finding the Winning Edge. And for those who do not know, or may have known, there was a NFL Life on Bill Walsh. And I think there might have been another profile on Bill Walsh right around his passing in 07 or 08. I forget exactly when he passed, but I know it was like around towards the 2010 he passed away. So they did an NFL Life or some documentaries closer to the end of his life in 2008 where they were flaunting the Finding the Winning Edge book. And there were some prominent coaches who did their part in it. I think Brian Billick did. Maybe Mike Holmgren as well. But they were waving the book like that was the Bible. And so this book here, I'm just going to go by chapters because I haven't read, or I'm going to go by the table of contents because I haven't read this book in a while, but I remember this is one of the first books I read. Some of the books I checked out at the library at the time was after he retired from pro football, and he had written a book about his return to Stanford University in the early 90s. There were a string of video game titles with his name on it. Yes, I think it was the Bill Walsh College Football. So I'm gonna go based on table of contents, and just gonna be a quick comparison and contrast against this one, because there's a lot to a person, and there's a lot to a person's devotion to a craft, a trade. So in his case, developing the 49ers to what it became in the in the 80s and early 90s, and then just in overall. So you kind of see the subtitle there. I'm sorry if I covered it, but it should read my philosophy of leadership, or for leadership. Yeah, my philosophy of leadership. So I'm going to go off of this because you can tell this is likely more 49ers centric. So based on the table of contents here, I'm going to read off all 20 chapters. So scripting the game, the care and feeding of quarterbacks, the cutting edge, disappointment in Cincinnati, planning the season, worse than expansion, Hollywood Henderson, and my drug education. The first breakthrough, building an organization, drafting for success, putting it together, the first champion, dealing with the genius label, the repeating problem, goodbye to the veterans, the triumphal parade, triumph and tragedy, the 1987 season, the quarterback controversy, our two greatest games, and retiring on a high note. So you can tell right away this is very much 49ers centric. This one's more philosophy of leadership centric, and you can tell that just from the opening chapters when I had started reading this. So this is around the time, maybe towards the end of his life. This was like to be a summation. It has some contributions from Joe Montana, his own son, and it looks like a confidant friend, Steve Jameson, and opens up very succinctly with the prologue to it: to succeed, you must fail. So I'm going to go off the table of contents. It looks like it's broken into 3. Let me double check how many total parts. So in some 5 parts. So I'm going to base it off the parts, and I'll do a couple of intros. So my part 1, my standard of performance, an environment of excellence. Maybe something folks like Disney and whatever entertainment entities, something they should learn or relearn. How to know if you're doing the job. Here's looking at you, Mr. Filoni. KK, you know who you are. Coaches aren't supposed to cry. Survive 1 minute at a time. My 5 do's for getting back in the game. My 5 don'ts. My standard performance. High requirements for actions and attitudes. An organization has a conscience. Part 2. Success is not spelled genius. Genius. Innovation, planning, and common sense. Oh, a few more lessons these floundering media entertainment organizations can learn. Opportunity is in the eye of the beholder. The West Coast offense checkers the chess. Lessons of the Bill Walsh offense. Welcome skeptics to your team. Share the glory. Write your own script for success. Flying by the seat of your pants is no way to travel. Fundamentals of leadership, concepts, conceits, and conclusions. He puts in quotations, I am the leader. The common denominator of leadership, strength of will, Be right, be wrong for the right reasons. Protect your turf, be a leader. 12 habits plus 1. Sweat the right small stuff. Sharp pencils do not translate into sharp performance. Good leadership percolates down. The rules may change, but the game goes on. I strike out the first time, not the second. Okay, this is part 3. Okay. Let's go into part 4. Essentials of a winning team: people, priorities, and performance. Money talks. Treating people right talks louder. You're as good as your good people. The over and under. The art of managing confidence. The under. Strive to be a 1-point underdog. Seek character. Beware characters. A big cheer for a big ego. The bottom 20% may determine your success. Avoid the dance of the doomed. Use the four most powerful words. Extreme effort requires extreme prudence. The Bubba diet. The Bubba diet. You can't transplant willpower. Conventional wisdom is an oxymoron. Part 5. Thin Skin, Baloney, and the Star-Spangled Banner. Looking for lessons in my mirror. How you get good. No mystery to mastery. Sine qua non. Your work ethic. What William Archibald Walsh taught his son. The perfection of the puzzle. The gladiator mentality. Get your mind right. I never sang the Star-Spangled Banner. My strengths? Unleash mentors. Tell your team to teach. Don't do unto others what Paul don't do unto others what Paul Brown did unto me. And he details that as well in the Building a Champion book. 9 steps for a healthy heart. Seriously, don't be too serious. The last word on getting in the last word. Surprising news. Response to the element of surprise. Don't delay delegating. Famous last words, I'll do it myself. Cut your losses before they cut you. Hey, here's looking at you, Bob. And look below the surface. There's more than meets the eye. Thank you, Valiant Renegade and WDW Pro. And everybody else like world-class BSers. There'll be so many to list and mention, but when it comes to that whole Disney mess, Valiant and WDW Pro have been on top of it. What 0 points for winning means you're losing. So, it's interesting because I can take these 2 books. I can take all of the interviews. Yes, he has had plenty. There are actually probably some Bill Walsh videos, interviews, lectures on YouTube. I think I found a couple of lectures that he gave either before his retirement or after his retirement, where he was doing stuff for Stanford by then again. And it's very interesting how Revelation has worked when it comes to, doesn't matter if we're talking even Christianity or anything, any faith, fill in the blank faith, but we have so many sources of revelation, and I do find it interesting that we come so quickly to a narrative without considering all the other points and sources of revelation, whether it is, if you have the fortune of being grafted through joining a franchise that was connected by way of Walsh's personal handing down, or even within the 2nd or 3rd generation. And that's one thing I'm learning as I go through my life, whether my time in the JKD world, I do not look down on what I had before. Everything for me has been a major reconciliation process, and it keeps going. And you'll find sources of revelation, whether you, doesn't even seem to matter if it's something from your past or your present. That all of these things that you come in contact with, that is just source of either a mini tradition, which may lead to a bigger one. Especially since I've been on YouTube, starting with my layoff period, where I started learning that there's more to this YouTube thing than just getting how to. Thanks to Netters Network, Last Call with Troy Pacelli, that, and then especially Retroblasting, who helped connect all these dots I'm connected to, and there is a much greater tradition than we want to admit. That everybody has a I don't know if it's a purpose, but everyone has a little calling to be a conduit, be an outlet for insight within a greater culture, whether we're talking overall pop culture, or if we're talking music and movies, or if we're talking toys. Now, in respect to my exposure to Bill Walsh, the 49ers, and it's funny when I think of the people who kind of poo-poo team sports, but there's something to be said about, if you look at it from the right perspective, team sports, and especially in the military world where team building is important, there's a lot more in common than we want to realize. Yeah, there are some sports I may not care for, but I do respect the endeavor, the experience, the effort required, whether we're talking global, European, or non-American football, American football, or basketball. Now, basketball on the one hand, yes, especially in pro basketball, yeah, you have that superstar component, and yes, there's a little bit of that with pro football, but the NBA really is a focus of the stars. I don't know if it's at fault for doing that, but that's what it's become. Yes, there are teams who've shown that you may not need to have that superstar collection in order to win a championship. Here's looking to the Denver Nuggets though they have their own cadre of good players from all accounts, from what I've been exposed to, thanks to Mark Schlereth and listening to the Denver sports scene. But Denver Nuggets wouldn't have what you would call a collection of blue chip players. They have good players. They have people who can contribute and people who have risen to occasion in the most important times of a venture, championship venture. So this whole exercise, this whole nerding out, this whole, especially when it comes to Bill Walsh, I will not be a Bill Walsh expert, nor will I attempt to be, because what's given to me within the greater tradition of what Bill Walsh meant to the sport of pro football, I only get it from the football side of things. Now, there have been some documentaries and Football Life documentaries, NFL Films documentaries, interviews he's done. You can kind of get an idea of who Bill Walsh is and was. And I think in some ways, he kind of brings that out in this book. And I think to some degree in this book, he's one not afraid to bear out his emotions where it was appropriate for the text. So I know that seems odd, but I know it seems odd that I'm unboxing physical media like a book about a coach. Well, I'm sure whenever Bill Belichick decides to retire, I think a lot of people would want that book. Now, be up to him if I think he might have a book or two. I'll probably do that in another segment or another section of a greater video. I will likely do a follow-up about, hey, is Finding a Winning Edge, is that within my grasp? Is the cost worth the time? Is it not terrible? I don't know if I'll ever find a good price on it, but I've seen a lot of out of print books in the realm of $300. Between you and everybody, between me and all of you, it's a bit steep. So that's where I'll stop for the moment. You may get a second phase to the overall video. Like I said, I'm going to scour for a moment about, hey, where can I find this video? Or not this video, but finding a winning edge. Because it'd be an interesting comparison, because this came after that. Of course, Finding a Winning Edge was out in 97 or 98. And I don't know why I didn't think of picking up a copy. I guess because I was still in school and I didn't have the EP or earning power at the time. All right. Hang tight. Like I said, I'll be doing my scouring clip or phase of the video. So I'll catch you then. Now, hello, fellow skeptics. I just rebooted my machine, just as I was expected to do once I've updated to multi-lib support. In the meantime, before I try to do my first testing of the multi-lib, I'm going to log into the super user on my command line. Yep, see? I'm going to try that again. There we are. I'm going to do a good Slack package update for good measure, just to see. And as I mentioned previously, if they don't see an update if they have the list already up to date, I'm going to say no. I'm going to go Slack package upgrade all, just to see if, with the libraries I've got. As you can see, the additional libraries I've added as multi-lib. As you can see, I've got a multi-lib alien. I'm going to uncheck anything that references that in the installed section. Any and all. And it looks like outside of all of that, along with this patch set, I can just actually hit escape. So I have nothing new. In the meantime, I was also, just to touch upon kernel update preparation, it's been years since I've last done the kernel recompilation process. Like I said, I'm at a point in my Linux life where I don't feel the need to recompile my kernel. I can look up any documentation that has been up to date. With respect to that, if it's still beneficial to recompile the kernel, for me, my system moves fairly well enough, and also I don't see a need to. Like I said, I'll look it up, see if I'm within that whole Linux mindset. But if you are thinking about recompiling your kernel, depending on the main benefit was you wouldn't load as many things or modules into memory. But with today's computing standards, where 16 gigabytes of RAM or more or less the sweet spot. But if you are one of those that wants to keep a clean kernel, I'm going to start with an LSPCI. You can see here my Kate file. I'll go like this. You can see I've already done some prep work, but I'm just going to show the commands I do. LSPCI. This gives me that listing there. I also did mount, which will list things that have been mounted, whether that's devices. And so what you're seeing here, that all these reference points, I hope you can read what's on the left. TMPFS is on this, and it's going to tell you where this is mounted on. You can tell the mount points based on the / and then the dev. This was a major point in why I adopted Linux full time. Learning things like that about how folders and drives are handled and treated. For those who have been using Windows, you're pretty much limited to letters. So the number of letters in the American alphabet. So A through Z. So you have to be very careful about how you go about your drive management. Now, in all seriousness and realism, I find it hard that people will exhaust all 26 letters, but the other side of the argument is, hypothetically, why would you want to limit yourself? Because every device, when you mount it, whether we're talking an external drive, like I have 2 external drives, and then I also have my storage devices. I have 2 drives in a RAID 1 array. I also have 2 NVMe, as well as a solid state drive. I believe I have 4 solid state drives. So having that, and I can section off any way I want. The main reason for partitioning is just as a fallback. And in the event you have to reinstall or reset up your system, you have files that have been partitioned away from the system area where you would put your programs. And the amount of flexibility one has, that the other command I would run as well is I ran my text editor to print out. Would be my file system table, fstab, and you can tell this is what's launched or what's mounted when I get into my system. And it also tells me what type of partition they are. So I have 2 swap partitions. I have a home, as well as a CD-ROM. Floppy is just probably the traditional default. I can hold down Control, hit letter X, and I believe there might be one I should put, but I'm going to type in LSUSB. And what I can do with here is point out that these are the devices attached to my machine at the moment. And I'm going to just edit my text file, and I'm just going to paste it, and then I'm just going to save it. This is so that and you can see here the different file system types. You saw ext4. That helps me figure out what things I need to load. And so when I look at mount, it should show me, yes, this one here says ext4, and where's the other one here? Yes. This technically is an NTFS partition that I share between my Windows and my Linux environments. But you can see here, my gaming partition is set up for ext4. So that would tell me I would want to load the NTFS module in the recompilation of my kernel. And I would like to put them run them in kernel at the kernel level instead of the module level. There's a process to do that. So that's kind of the prep work. And especially if you need to know exactly what you have in terms of your devices. And when you do the process, you do have a pretty good categorization when you want to go down to each device section in the kernel module and all that. So I'm going to do that. And for Slackware, you can download your new kernel. As you saw in the listing of that, it was in the form of patches, but you can download kernel headers. You can believe kernel firmware along with the actual kernel source code, where you would see. So if I were to go to user, so I'm going to change my directory, user, and then source. I'll start there, and then I can do a dir. And I can go into that, and I can just do another dir. And here, this is where you would run your compilation processes. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to take you on a quick journey of, hopefully quick. I'm going to use my menu here. So tempted to call it start menu, but it's pretty much the principle of the start menu. People say, oh, that looks like Windows. Yeah, maybe it does. And a lot of operating systems like Mac, they have like what's called like a storage key. Or at least it ties in with your browser. And I'm going to just do a quick query, Slackware compile kernel. And yeah, you can go to different sources. It says yet another kernel compile guide. And they're just running through a guide, creating kernel configs. So if you really want to build your kernel, and especially when you need to do that in the event of installing something like VirtualBox, and that's something I'll probably do in another video, but this is one guide. What was that? It said enjoy Slackware. Let's see what what I would believe to be traditional. So let's see. It gives more of an overview of the kernel and compiling the kernel and why to do so. And thank you. Most Slackware users will never need to compile a kernel. The huge and generic kernels contain virtually all the support you will need. Now here's the however. Some users may need to compile a kernel. If your computer contains bleeding edge hardware, a newer kernel may offer improved support. Yep. Sometimes a kernel patch may be available that can correct the problem you're experiencing. In these cases, a kernel compile is probably warranted. If you still think compiling your kernel is something you want or need to do. So this looks like one of the more classic guides based on what I'm looking at here, because they're referring to kernel 2.6. We are in kernel 5. You saw what I was. You saw where I was. Let's go back to the. Command line here. 5.15.17. And looks like my wallet manager. This is the password manager, at least for this desktop environment. Oh yeah, I know why. Because most people, especially like myself, because I use pretty similar passwords, but I still vary them up. And it may pop back up if I did it wrong. So that's pretty much in a nutshell. I'm going to try to, looks like, let's see if Steam launched upon login and boot. Doesn't look like it, so I can actually do this, and I can just type in Steam. And it's really interesting because I have my shortcuts for my games already. And this may feed into another video about Linux gaming. I'm going to probably do another guide because, as I explained, some games may require more things. But Steam is a nice little alternative, especially if you feel as though you're running out of space. So I should be able to launch Steam. I'm going to see if this loads. And intriguing. It's in the midst of updating Steam, and I've noticed that whether I'm in Windows or Linux, Steam does do plenty of updating for itself. So cool. At least it's recognizing it. So if I go to Slack builds, as I mentioned, I'm going to open this in a new tab. As far as Vivaldi, like I said, I came around. The funky reason why, if you really want to know why, every other Chrome variant outside of this has what I like to call this function. Is it so hard for a Chrome variant to include this? Just honest question, because Firefox has had that feature. Even Apple Safari has had that. A Quake console. Okay. Either way, I have my library. And it'll tell you whether or not this can be installed in your environment. I haven't installed. Okay. I could technically install this if I wanted to. Both installments, okay. Arma 3. Interesting, I thought I had installed it, but okay. Battle for West North. Does it not recognize my games? Oh well. But going back to Slack builds, let's go back to Slack builds here. At least when it comes to, because in terms of the Linux world, I talked about the fragmentation. A lot of the stuff that's pushed out is for the popular distributions, mainly Ubuntu, and the most common format is the .deb, and it says a multi-lib installation is required to run Steam on 64-bit Slackware, which I had. That was the deciding factor to finally move from a purely 64-bit Slackware experience to a multi-library, or what they call 6432, for that compatibility. And yes, I know people might hate me for it, but I am running an NVIDIA Quadro, as I explained in my Torx video. But at least when it comes to driver support, NVIDIA has always had the best drivers by reputation, done AMD or ATI before they merged with AMD. Not so much. So that's a bit for kernel prep. Looks like my multi-library is still kicking in. I just had to replace the libraries I lost based on what you witnessed in my installation process. For the multi-lib, I had just a handful of files that needed to be updated because, as you witnessed, it skipped a lot of things because there were items already present on my system.